You don't provoke a storm and expect silence. But that's exactly what they did. In a crowded room filled with ego, noise, and hidden tension, a few men decided to test a man they clearly didn't understand. They saw calmness and mistook it for weakness. They saw patience and thought it was fear. But what they didn't realize was this. Some people don't react instantly. Not because they can't, but because they're choosing the exact moment to end everything. What happened next wasn't loud, wasn't dramatic, but it was enough to leave everyone frozen. Because when Bruce Lee finally moved, it wasn't anger they witnessed. It was precision, control, and a lesson none of them would ever forget. They stood there, whispering among themselves, throwing subtle jabs disguised as jokes, each one sharper than the last. The air was thick with tension, but Bruce Lee remained still, his presence almost unreadable. To them, his silence was an invitation. They believed they were winning some invisible battle, slowly pushing him toward a reaction they desperately wanted to see. One of them stepped closer, invading his space, testing boundaries that should have never been crossed. Another laughed, louder this time, trying to draw attention, trying to turn the moment into entertainment. But Bruce Lee didn't move, not yet. His eyes, calm but focused, revealed something deeper, calculation. He wasn't ignoring them, he was studying them, measuring every movement, every tone, every intention. Time stretched in a way that made the moment feel heavier than it was. The room began to notice. Conversations slowed. People turned their heads. There's a certain energy that builds before something significant happens, and everyone could feel it creeping in. Still, the provocations continued. A hand gesture. Here, a mocking comment there. They pushed further, believing they were in control. But what they didn't understand was that Bruce Lee wasn't reacting because he had already assessed the situation. He knew exactly how far it would go, exactly how it would end. His patience wasn't passive, it was strategic. Then, in a fraction of a second, everything shifted. No warning, no dramatic buildup, just movement. Fast, precise, undeniable. It wasn't about aggression, it was about clarity. In that single moment, all the noise disappeared. The laughter stopped. The arrogance faded. What replaced it was silence, the kind that comes when reality hits harder than expectation. The man who stepped forward found himself frozen, not because of fear alone, but because he realized too late who he was dealing with. Bruce Lee didn't need to say a word. His actions spoke with a level of authority that words could never reach. The room stayed still, as if everyone was processing what they had just witnessed. There was no chaos, no unnecessary display, just a quiet understanding that something important had taken place. Those who had tried to test him stepped back, their confidence replaced with hesitation, not humiliation, but realization. They had crossed a line without knowing its weight, and now they understood it completely. Bruce Lee returned to stillness, just as quickly as he had moved. No celebration, no acknowledgement of what had just happened. Because for him, it wasn't about proving anything. It never was. It was about control, over himself, over the moment, over the outcome. They thought patience meant permission. Every second that passed without a reaction gave them more confidence, more boldness, more reason to keep going. It started small, subtle. Remarks, half smiles, glances exchanged like they were sharing a private joke at his expense. But moments like these have a way of escalating when no one steps in, when silence is misread as surrender. And that's exactly what happened. They kept pushing, slowly at first, then with more intention, more edge. One comment turned into another, sharper, more direct. The tone shifted. What was once disguised as humor became obvious disrespect. Bruce Lee stood there composed, his breathing steady, his posture relaxed but grounded. There was no sign of irritation on his face, no visible crack in his calm. To an untrained eye, it looked like he was unaffected. But inside, something else was happening, something far more disciplined. He wasn't absorbing their words, He was observing their behavior. Every gesture, every step they took closer, every attempt to provoke him was being calculated, understood, and stored. His patience wasn't endless. It was measured. There's a difference between someone who can't react and someone who chooses not to. That difference is invisible until the moment it reveals itself. And in that room, no one seemed to recognize it. They crossed from playful to personal without hesitation. One of them stepped forward again, closer than before, invading space. That demanded a response. The energy shifted instantly. What was once uncomfortable now felt dangerous. People nearby could sense it, even if they didn't fully understand it. Still, Bruce Lee didn't move. But something had changed. His stillness was no longer passive, it was deliberate. His eyes sharpened, his focus narrowing onto the person in front of him. It wasn't anger that filled the space around him, but clarity. He had reached the line, and once that line is crossed, patience is no longer a virtue. It becomes a decision point. The man in front of him didn't step back. Instead, he leaned in further, testing the final boundary. That was the mistake, because patience, no matter how strong, has a limit, and when that limit is reached by someone who understands control, the response isn't chaotic, it's exact. In a single moment, faster than most could even process, Bruce Lee moved. No wasted motion, no unnecessary force, just precision. A controlled action that stopped everything instantly. The effect was immediate. The tension that had been building collapsed into silence. The same people who had been laughing just seconds ago were now frozen, unsure of what they had just witnessed. It wasn't just the speed, it was the certainty behind it. There was no doubt, no hesitation in what he did. It was final in a way that words could never be. The man who had pushed too far understood it instantly. Not through pain, not through humiliation, but through realization. He had mistaken patience for weakness, and now he was standing face to face with the truth. No one said anything. No one needed to. Because the lesson had already been delivered in the most direct way possible. Real strength doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand attention, and it certainly doesn't waste energy trying to prove a point. But in that moment, surrounded by noise, ego, and growing tension, that truth was completely ignored. They believed strength had to be loud, visible, dominant. And because Bruce Lee wasn't reacting the way they expected, they assumed he had nothing to show. That assumption slowly turned into confidence, the kind that blinds people just before reality hits. By now, the atmosphere had shifted, beyond simple teasing. It wasn't about jokes anymore. It was about dominance, about pushing someone until they either break or respond. The group had convinced themselves that they were in control of the situation. Each second of silence from Bruce Lee only fed that illusion. One of them circled slightly as if trying to get a better angle. Another folded his arms with a smirk, waiting for something, anything to happen. They weren't just testing his patience anymore. They were challenging his identity, and still Bruce Lee stood there unmoved, no change in posture, no visible reaction. But beneath that stillness was something far more powerful than anger. Discipline. The kind of discipline that doesn't just control action but controls timing. He wasn't holding back because he had to. He was holding back because he understood something they didn't. The moment you react without purpose, you lose control of the outcome. The room had gone quieter now. Even those who weren't directly involved could feel the shift. There's a certain silence that isn't peaceful. It's heavy, expectant. The kind of silence that builds just before something decisive happens. And right in the center of it, all stood a man who had already made his decision. One final comment cut through the air, sharper, more direct than anything before it. It wasn't just disrespectful, it was intentional. It was the kind of line that once crossed, changes everything. And in that instant, the balance shifted completely. Not gradually, not subtly, completely. Bruce Lee moved. It wasn't dramatic. There was no buildup, no warning. Just a single, precise action executed with absolute control. It happened so fast that most people didn't even register the movement itself, only the result. One moment, there was tension and noise. The next, there was silence. Complete, undeniable silence. No one laughed this time. The confidence that had filled the room just seconds ago disappeared instantly, not because of fear alone, but because of understanding. They finally saw what had been there all along. The calm wasn't emptiness. The silence wasn't weakness. It was restraint. Intentional, controlled, and powerful restraint. The man who had pushed the furthest stepped back, not forced, but compelled by realization. He didn't need another warning. He didn't need another demonstration. One moment was enough to erase every assumption he had made, because true strength doesn't repeat itself to be believed. Bruce Lee returned to stillness, just as calm as before, as if nothing had happened. And that was the part that stayed with everyone. Not the speed, not the precision, but the control. The ability to act without emotion, to respond without chaos, and then to return to peace as if the storm had never existed.